Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. And in today, we're going to be giving a breakdown of how the melee DPS are currently feeling in PvP on the War Within beta. Now, there are big changes happening pretty much every week. If you want to make sure that you're not missing any of those, then smash the subscribe button. Your support is greatly appreciated. The purpose of this video is to kind of evaluate where the specializations are currently standing, which ones need kind of the most help, and which ones are kind of dominating right now, and seeing how that trend moves throughout the beta week to week. So this will be a tier list that's updated as changes occur, so that you can kind of track how your specialization is doing leading up to the release of the expansion. So let's get started here. We got Arms Warrior. Now, Arms Warrior is very powerful at the moment, I would say, in arena environments, particularly solo shuffle. I think in Battlegrounds, it's going to start to fall off a lot more. I think limited mobility. It's easily crowd controlled. It doesn't really have any stealth mechanics. Sharpened Blade is probably like the big selling point for it in terms of reducing healing. So if it can impact a team fight there, unfortunately healing is tuned very high right now that I'm not sure that being a team fight oriented spec will actually be the most optimal for battleground situations. But in arena, you're either hard countered or you just dominate. And it's really hit and miss in that regard. If you get a lobby with a bunch of melee DPS, you'll feel like a king, a top dog. But if you get a lobby with mages and hunters and elemental shamans and casters, you're just going to get pulled around and be completely miserable. And that kind of goes for both warrior specs in this regard. So for me, because Arms Warrior is so polarized, and because I think it's going to be a little bit lackluster when it comes to battleground scenarios, I can't comfortably put it on S tier. I've been watching a lot of other streamers. They've been constructing their tier lists, gathering their opinions, watching their gameplay, and they're giving Arms Warrior a very high ranking. But I think when you have this kind of like rock, paper, scissors for a spec, there's no way that I can comfortably put it that high. So right now I'm going to be putting Arms Warrior on A tier. I think that both the hero talent trees, the Slayer and the Colossus, are actually very good. They have their situational niches in terms of whether you want overall sustained damage or you want big burst hits, which is nice. So it's just a really solid spec in that regard, but it's way too rock, paper, scissors. Honestly, one of the biggest things they need to do is for mage on the Frostfire mage tree. They have a talent where when they reach max Frostfire master or something like that, they proc an Ice Nova root, and Ice Nova doesn't DR with anything else, and they can seemingly get to that max stack with like almost within the duration of the root. I was playing yesterday and I'd get like Ice Nova proc root into an Ice Nova proc root into an Ice Nova proc root, and it'd be the same as getting Frost Nova for 8 seconds, except you have no way to get out of it because it's 4 separate 1.5 second roots. Like, you gnome out of one, you avatar out of one, and then you root it again, and then you root it again, and you're just constantly snared. I kind of think that they need to consider looking at snares universally. If a snare doesn't have a cooldown, it's spammable. I don't think it should exceed 50% movement speed reduction. I think any snares that are 70% and up need to have some sort of cooldown, so you're thinking actively about when you want to time that. Arms Warrior is the best example of that. You got Hamstring, which is spammable. It's only 50%. But Piercing Howl with the cooldown is 70%. So having classes like Frost Mage and Death Knight with spammable snares that are 70% plus at all times, I think having certain abilities that have cooldowns, like maybe Frozen Orb is down and it's a 70% snare, but when you're out of it, you're only 50% snared. It would go a long way. And we saw that change actually in Legion when they were doing a lot of like PvP specific tuning, is that they made snares universally 50%, and it made the game way less frustrating and way less polarizing as melee DPS specifically. Now obviously you would likely have to compensate a bit for things like Death Knight depending on their survivability at that point, and you tune and counterbalance for that, but it's just not fun to never move literally the entire game as a melee, and I think that would be worth putting some time into so that classes don't feel so polarized in that regard. Assassination Rogue, on the other hand, is really good. You do phenomenal damage, similar to the end of Dragonflight in terms of overall damage. I'd say weaknesses are kind of defense. You do get 2 charges of Vanish now, but almost always I'm going to think you're going to want to use this for doing damage. I thought that Assassination was the best Rogue spec, but I'm not too certain about it anymore. Now, Rogue is probably going to be one of the best specs into casters, and casters look really strong right now on the beta for this current assessment. So being a Rogue, I think, is actually really ideal. But Assassination, I'm trying to remember how like viable it looked when it was in cleave situations, because it's going to feel better into casters, but into cleaves, I don't think it's going to feel as good. So I want to put it on S tier, but And the other thing too is taking into account Battleground Blitz. I think Rogue specs are probably going to be like the most phenomenal there, and I'm considering this like an overall list. So maybe I'm going to put it up on the S tier, or I'm going to have to bump Arms Warrior down actually. We might move all of this as we go through it, but Assassination Rogue is really good overall damage. It's going to be great in the caster meta. And I think it's honestly decent into pretty much everything. You're probably Rogue is going to be the best Battleground Blitz class melee by far, bar none, assuming that team fights are not going to be an important component because healing is so overtuned. Enhancement Shaman, I don't think it's as bad as people are outlining it to be. It's very similar to Arms, where like you can get lobbies that are kind of frustrating, although you have tools to navigate around it, with Static Field Totem, Grounding Totem, disrupting casters from ranged as opposed to Arms Warrior, so it's actually not as polarizing, but you're kind of a spec that relies on having a Mortal Strike in the lobby. Like you synergize really well with classes that have Mortal Strike, and if there isn't one, you kind of just like run around hoping to blast somebody, and it can be really difficult in that regard. But I don't think it's as terrible as a lot of people are letting it on to be. I think it actually has a lot of potential. I'm going to put it onto B tier for now. In terms of the overall tuning, I don't think the damage is kind of like completely not there. It's just a very similar issue to, you know, the same problems that Warrior has, where snares, not able to move, not able to connect, make it very difficult to play. Feral Druid is surprisingly good at the moment, although I would say it's a little bit more complicated to play than a lot of other melee DPS. Combo point management, spammable crowd control, there's a lot more to consider with it, but it's way tankier than it was in Dragonflight, which was a major improvement in terms of its overall viability. It seems like bear form for it is really good. I think it might be because they've rewinded some of the nerfs that they made to bear form. Feral Druid, again, much like Rogue, it's going to be able to stealth to bases, cap them with Cyclone, so I think it'll be really good in those maps. I'm not sure how good of a flag carrier it makes. I haven't seen a Feral Druid flag carrier, but I wouldn't imagine that it's completely terrible. Just being able to spam shapeshift out of snares and utilize bear form to tank damage. So it seems like it would be a decent Battleground Blitz spec with how it's currently standing. Its damage is high. Most Feral Druids are playing the Wild Seeker Vines and just getting a lot of extra damage. I want to kind of put this on A tier at the moment. Probably better than Arms Warrior, but pretty close. It's just really well rounded. Honestly, I'd say Feral Druid is just in a really good spot. Just a solid spot. Doesn't seem like brutally overpowered. You're probably going to struggle with rogues, and I just don't see a lot of rogues. That's why we've actually got like the no data here for some specializations, because just nobody is testing them. I haven't seen them on streams or queued into them myself. But Feral just feels like it's like in a solid spot. I don't think anything about it is like standing out as being super OP or super underpowered or underwhelming. It's honestly just really well designed. You know, considering at this stage of beta, we still have a few more weeks of tuning. I think it's really good. Ideally, I think you want your spec to be on A tier. You're in a spot where there's just nothing ridiculous about it. It's just solid all around, or it has, you know, some countermatch situations. Frost Death Knight, on the other hand, is just really good right now. It's really good. It is just really tanky with the anti-magic shield changes that have come through, with the talents being added into it. You have a very high stamina pool. With how high stamina is in general, it's good. You have a lot of talents that increase your percent health, so you just have a really high stamina pool. Anti-magic shield absorbs a ton of damage. You have got crazy good damage right now with Reaper's Mark. Reaper's Mark is hitting somewhere around like 3 mil, and if you're a class that can get crits above 2 mil, like, you're in a really competitive spot, because, you know, I think it's like 6 to 8 mil is the average health pool depending on what spec you are. Frost DK feels really good. This is probably like one of the best times to be a Frost DK, especially with Reaper's Mark. But I kind of expect Reaper's Mark to get tuned and nerfed a bit with how hard it's hitting with Exterminate and Reaper's Mark together. But we'll have to wait and see, obviously. Fury Warrior, really powerful, similar to Arms Warrior. I honestly think it's stronger than Arms Warrior, and it's easier to play and easier to get things off, specifically in cleave matchups. And it can do really well into like Death Knight melee lobbies is when I feel the strongest. Bladestorm is definitely a really good addition. But they introduced hero talents for Slayer that were when you charge out of a root, and then they realized, hey, this might be kind of overpowered. Let's put a pretty significant cooldown on it. But then when they did that, they also deleted the PvP talent to enrage out of roots. So now you got a nerfed talent on charging out of roots, and you don't have enrage to get out of roots. You've got Bladestorm, which is nice, but most classes have something that can counter it. They can line it up with Feigned Death damage reduction. They can line it up with Alter Time. Most classes have something that they can press to kind of like negate your Bladestorm if they're timing that, which is the only window where you're really able to actually attack these range specializations at the moment. And because of that, you just feel like you get countered. So this is where I'm kind of struggling on where I want to put Fury Warrior relative to Arms, because I do think Fury is overall stronger, but it has the same weaknesses and the same approach. to PvP situations where you're just going to struggle with it. So for right now, we'll put it on A, but it's definitely better than Arms Warrior. Might even be better than Feral. It's a pretty tough race here for these ones. Havoc Demon Hunter. It's not doing like spectacular, but it's not doing terribly. You're still like the Swiss Army Knives class with all the different CCDRs, tons of mobility, even more mobility than last expansion. And Metamorphosis still makes you really tanky. But you're going to get strung along by all these casters and the powerful snare effects at the moment. And I haven't seen any like big crits, I think is the big difference. A lot of these specs that are on the top side are either just doing an overwhelming amount of damage, or they bring abilities like Kidney Shot to make themselves feel really competitively viable in these scenarios. So for me, I think Havoc is kind of like mid. It's not as good as it is currently in Dragonflight. Damage is like, you know, you could probably make it work, but main thing is that it just doesn't have a heavy hitting ability. I think like almost every other class has like a moment where they're going to do like 2+ million burst damage, and it doesn't seem like you have that nearly as much as you did in the past. Now, Outlaw Rogue, this is first one where I'm going to have to put on no data. The only Outlaw Rogue that I've seen, it was someone that challenged me to a duel, and then my Q popped in the middle of the duel. It didn't feel like their damage was terribly low. Like I was a Fury Warrior, and in this most recent build, Rogues all got a damage buff. So I'm not expecting Outlaw Rogue to be just like completely god awful with the buffs that came through, but I just haven't seen it to be able to tell you like 100%. Now its defense is still really good. Defense between Outlaw and Subtlety still maxed out. You still have that going for you, and I would think that more likely than not, you're just going to continue to get damage buffs, which could put Rogue in just, you know, the best spot in the house basically for the next expansion week to week. But for right now, in this week, I have no data to really report on it other than its tankiness feels the same as it would in Dragonflight, which is the highest of probably any spec in the game. Ret Paladin, the couple of Rets that I've seen, it's felt a bit weaker, honestly. It did get a lot of nerfs in this most recent build. It's hard to say because I play against AWC Champion on Mage, and then I play against Jim Bob Joe on Ret, and then it's like, is Ret really struggling, or is the guy that forgot to buy Enchants and hasn't played Ret before, he's trying for the first time on beta for fun, just like not there 100% in terms of delivering what is possible? You know, this one is a hard one. I don't want to say it's a no data. I think just by having all of its core abilities being so ranged now, it doesn't fall into the same trap that a lot of the other melee DPS like Demon Hunter and Warriors fall into against mages and hunters. They can still get damage out against those classes, unlike these ones that will just get strung along, which is a huge advantage. But in a caster meta, it's funny. In the past, I would have said Ret is like one of the weakest in a caster meta. I don't know if that's true anymore. With spell warding and with bubble, you can immune, run in, and get a lot of damage out. You've got a lot of range damage. I don't know where I want to put this one. This is a really, really hard one. I want to say that it's still kind of A tier at the moment. It's like between A or B. I think that it's still pretty strong. We'll have to see how it plays out with the changes that come through next week, whether or not there's going to be Mythic Plus tuning. It doesn't feel as good, obviously, as the previous week. Maybe I would have put it closer to S tier or something. But right now, it seems like you're going to be able to make it work. Subtlety Rogue, I was surprised. I've queued into Calvish. I saw Calvish play games against Raikou. I've watched Naj play Subtlety Rogue. Its damage is actually pretty high. It was out damaging Fury Warrior. It was top damage in some lobbies in some rounds, which I wasn't expecting. And I think they're all playing, what is it called, Death Stalker or something like that. And they're just getting big eviscerates. They're getting like 2.8 mil plus eviscerates with procs, like maybe 4 mil. Some of the complaints I've seen about Rogue and Survival Hunter, actually, it's funnily enough, it's next to each other, but is that those talent trees enable your eviscerate to also AoE. So now it's not even just secret technique that AoEs. It's like your eviscerate during your biggest moment is also going to AoE. So you're probably going to be breaking a lot of CC. But if Subtlety Rogue's damage is high, it's still basically immortal. It's still the best 1v1 spec in the game. It's going to absolutely dominate in Battleground Blitz if it does even any amount of damage because of how good it is at 1v1 and how mobile it is. It's going to be a star there. And if its damage gets much higher in Arena, then this is just going to be like the all-star spec. So for me, I kind of want to put Subtlety Rogue pretty high. Although it seems kind of gimmicky. You've got to like time around this one-hit wonder. But in a caster meta, how good casters are, you've got immunities to survive the burst of a lot of these hard-hitting classes. I want to put it up on S, I'm not going to lie, especially because I think it's just going to keep getting buffed. But I'm trying to like be fair and assess it just for this week specifically. But from what I saw from it, it seems like it has a lot of potential. Maybe it's me not 100% understanding the new builds of it, and once you know where its specific one-shot window is, everyone's gonna have like 20 weak auras that know when it's happening, and they just counter you completely. But because we're playing in the beta with no add-ons, it's a lot better. That could be something to take into account. So it's good to listen to this commentary about the placement, because we don't have add-ons, so I can't like track anything, stun DRs, anything like that, to try and see when to counter it. So maybe we'll just leave it on A for right now. But it's definitely the best of the A. I think it's really good. Survival Hunter, this is a tough one. I've seen some Survival Hunters, at least on the pre-patch, actually doing pretty well in BG Blitz, which I found surprising. It's got decent overall damage. You can fall a bit into the trap of getting kited by the ranged. That's like the big question is with how well can a melee DPS deal with ranged, because ranged are just the best at the moment. They've really got to tone down the Ice Nova proc route from Frostfire Mage in PvP. It's got to have like some sort of internal cooldown of like 2 minutes or something, like proc an Ice Nova for 2 minutes, because it's just crazy good. Proccing a non-DRing route that hits you for 500,000 damage, and you can like chain react it together. It's just way too much. But Survival Hunter, I feel like this is a harder one for me to rank. I think it's decent, but you're gonna have to play Diamond Ice Trap pretty much every game now because you just AoE so much. Maybe we'll skip Survival Hunter for right now. Unholy DK was god tier. Previous week it was god tier, like best melee in the game, absolute king. But for some reason, I don't know if they nerfed something without posting anything, because every Death Knight that I've seen yesterday and the day before that, for this week of tuning, has not done like extremely well. Frost DK looks way better. So I think Unholy DK has kind of fallen off in that regard, and I don't understand 100% why. Because Death Knight can still do decently well in the caster lobbies with Death Grip and with Chains of Ice. And with the lockdown that it has during its burst, it can definitely still do well in caster situations, which is good. But for me, like Unholy, I feel like if I don't put it on S, people are going to meme like, well, how's Unholy DK on S? But I swear it's weaker. I definitely think it's weaker than Frost. So I'm going to put it onto S tier for now. Maybe we'll put it the lowest on S tier. I'm going to leave it here. Yeah, I think it's weaker than Frost, but I feel like Unholy is starting to fall off a bit. Windwalker Monk, not the best. Not the worst. You're doing okay damage. I'd say like your damage is keeping up with pretty much every other spec in the game when I'm looking at details and overall damage. But it's the same problem as Warrior, where it's just you get a mage and you just can't move. The snares are too oppressive. The root procs constantly. You're just never going to be able to move to those classes. So you can get like a melee lobby, but I'd say that Warriors are kind of out dominating you in those melee situations. And Death Knights are out dominating you in those melee DPS situations. So it's got to be kind of like mid at best. And then Survival Hunter, we got to get back onto this. Where are we going to put this? Survival Hunter. I honestly kind of want to put it here just on no data, just because I feel like I haven't seen enough of it, because I don't think it's S tier. I would be seeing it all the time as S tier. I don't necessarily think that it's like B tier, but maybe it is B tier. Maybe we'll put it here for now. There's no way it can be B tier, right? If it is B tier, I think it's the best of the B tier. It's just really tanky now with all the defensive changes that they've added to it, all the additional advancements. The survival ranking is kind of yeah, and again, it's because it's beta. It's hard to get all of the data 100%, but I do remember seeing a few rounds of it, and it didn't seem completely awful. But I don't remember it standing out kind of like the Death Knight tier is at the moment. But you can see that there's like a shift here. Death Knights, rogue specializations in particular, right? As we're going like from top to bottom. Maybe Fury Warrior's better than Ret. Maybe even Arms Warrior's better than Ret. We'll move these guys over here. Again, left to right means better to worst. So like this is the best of the S tier moving down, best of the A tier moving down, best of the B tier moving down type of situation. And then we got no data on Outlaw Rogue for this period of time. But you can see the specs are performing, getting into a good spot. I think universally for bringing up some of the melee DPS is a problem with snares, like I mentioned earlier on in the video. Having snares above 50% that are spammable is just completely inhibiting specs like Windwalker, Enhance, Warrior from really ever actually accomplishing anything in a lot of situations. You're just stuck permanently. So either adding tools to give these classes like some cooldowns on their Chains of Ice to be really powerful as opposed to every Chains of Ice, or Mage's Snares not always being as powerful as they are, I think would go a long way in terms of overall balance and making it less frustrating to be melee DPS in a lot of those situations. But this is my assessment right now for the beta. We still got a lot of weeks of updates, so I'm sure that this is likely going to change. But it's honestly not in that bad of a spot, when we're talking like, expansions coming out in like less than a month at this point. I feel like they're doing a really good job in terms of getting things together together and a couple more tweaks moving forward, that the game could be really good. And I remember Dragonflight was probably the most fun in like the first 2-week period to the first 2 months. It felt like they got the game really nailed down. Almost every spec felt really viable. I was having fun on like anything that I touched. And then we had the ret rework and the augmentation introduction, and that felt like they just did too big of a change all at once. Then everything kind of was a mess for a bit in Dragonflight. But I don't know if they're going to be doing that with this one. So the War Within right now, I think, has the potential to be an epically balanced expansion, and with the Battleground Blitz features and the Soul Shuffler features, so you can queue for both. Hopefully, you'll get out of a Blitz and immediately into a Shuffle, that you'll spend less time in queue and more time in game. I think that they're getting into a really solid spot. So those are my points of feedback in terms of what I think could be done to make the game more balanced and more competitive and less frustrating for some specs from those perspectives. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. And other than that, thank you very much for watching the video. I will see you in the next one.